Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera. Saya Syafzan Johari dan ini agenda Awani. Malam ini kita akan berbincang mengenai isu bertemakan mengangkat maruah kemanusiaan dan kehidupan sempena dengan anugerah penulis kemanusiaan yang dilancarkan oleh ICRC ataupun ICRC iaitu International Committee of the Red Cross ataupun Jawatankuasa Antarabangsa Palang Merah. Dan saya ada di sini bagi bincangkan mengenai perkara ini adalah penasihat perundangan serantau Jawatankuasa Antarabangsa Palang Merah ICRC iaitu Kelisiana Tin. Dan izinkan saya berbahasa Inggeris. Welcome to the studio, Kelisiana. And let's talk about the Young Humanitarian Writers Competition. This is the first of its kind in Malaysia and the first time you're organising it. What is the expectation?
Well, we're really hoping to get young writers, both journalists and people who are not actually journalists at the moment but might be thinking of becoming journalists, or basically citizen journalists, to write about international humanitarian law and write about it from the perspective of responses to human suffering, about particularly highlighting the life and dignity of people who are suffering during armed conflict.
You can write about things what has happened in Malaysia and outside of Malaysia. And what is do you have any target in terms of applications, in terms of submission? I'm sorry, in terms of submission and so on and so forth.
Yes. So the competition is open until the 5th of November this year. And as I said, we have a category for journalists and a category for non-journalists. And basically, people can write 400 words to 1,000 words about one of 6 topics. So those 6 topics are responses to human suffering. So looking at particular situations where somebody has made a difference in relation to victims of armed conflict or situations of violence. Healthcare in danger, which is a program that we're running at the moment on protection of medical workers, medical facilities and patients during armed conflict. Another of the themes that people could write about is the response of international organisations to situations of armed conflict. So, for example, what ASEAN might be able to do, what response ASEAN might be able to have in relation to providing aid. Another interesting subject is challenges for international humanitarian law. So the use of robots in armed conflict, for example. Drones, cyber warfare, a whole range of other new technologies. And also people can write about humanitarian action, how to be a humanitarian worker, and also whether the fundamental principles that we as the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies and the International Committee of the Red Cross that we work under. These fundamental principles are now 50 years old this year, so we're encouraging people to reflect on whether they really make a difference to humanitarian action. Is
this the first time for ICRC, or you have been doing this in some other countries?
We have run other journalism competitions in other countries, but this is definitely the first time in Malaysia. And I like the fact that as well it's in English and in Malay, so that it opens up to both the languages here.
All right. Then when we talk about ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and Malaysia, and the other one is Malaysia Red Crescent. And some people say that this is the same organization, but it's actually not. Yeah, can you explain?
Yeah, so we're basically sister organisations. We say that we're all part of the same family, but the International Committee of the Red Cross was founded over 150 years ago now, and it was basically the idea of one man, Henri Dunant. Sometimes we like to think of him almost as a citizen journalist. He wrote a book after his experiences in an armed conflict in Italy, the Battle of Solferino. And that really inspired the whole movement of the International Committee of the Red Cross, providing assistance to victims of armed conflict.
So ICRC is more targeted in helping or giving fast response to places or zone in conflict areas.
Yes, that's right.
And the other one is, let's say, the Red Crescent Society in Malaysia, for instance, is more about giving emergency responses. those are the difference.
Yes, absolutely. So ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, is working in conflict environments. Malaysian Red Crescent, for example, helped a lot with the floods in Malaysia earlier this year. And so basically that's the main difference between armed conflict and disasters. But the National Red Cross or Red Crescent societies, there's one Red Cross or one Red Crescent society in every country in the world. They can also help their own countries in times of conflict, and that's where the ICRC can provide them with support.
So in the Malaysia point of view, in the Malaysian context, how do you guys collaborate?
We work together very closely. Actually, we have some similar programs. So we have programs promoting international humanitarian law. So Malaysian Red Crescent has an international humanitarian law officer. So we work very closely with them on topics such as nuclear weapons, for example. So Malaysia is very pro-banning nuclear weapons. So Malaysian Red Crescent has got some programs on that. We also work on a program called Restoring Family Links. So putting people back in touch with their loved ones if they're missing as a result of disaster or conflict.
All right, we have to take our first break, and when we come back, we'll talk about preparing writers and journalists before they're entering the armed conflict or conflict zones. We'll talk about this more after this. Masih lagi bersama Kelisiana Tin. Beliau merupakan penasihat perundangan serantau Jawatankuasa Antarabangsa Palang Merah ICRC, dan malam ini kita membincangkan tema mengangkat maruah kemanusiaan dan kehidupan sempena pelancaran anugerah penulis kemanusiaan atau Young Humanitarian Writer Competition yang dianjurkan oleh ICRC. And now, when we talk about writing, of course you have writers and journalists, and for most journalists, we would like, bad news is always good news for us. I'm sorry, but that's what I learned during my times in university in journalism studies. Bad news is always good news. So we have this tendency to enter conflict zones. We eager, and especially when we talk among ourselves reporters in Astra Awani, we somehow rather like, hey, I want to go, you don't go. So we have to take turns instead. So, but one thing that is always been missed is preparing ourselves, preparing journalists before they enter the arms zone or the conflict zones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really important to prepare yourself to go into a conflict environment because it's a conflict. It's very unexpected. You really don't know what to expect before you're there. So you do need to have some thoughts in your mind anyway. You have to have some training beforehand before you go in. And from the ICRC's perspective, we would say that, first of all, you need training about security, about how to conduct yourself during a conflict environment and during your reporting. But also, we would say that you need to understand international humanitarian law very well so that you understand the protections that are available to you when you're in that environment, but then also so that you can report most accurately on those situations you find yourself. Yeah, that's right.
And is ICRC helping and to give what we call trainings to reporters? And
yeah, definitely. So we're very happy to give training to journalists, to reporters before they go into conflict environments, to brief them on some of the issues. If we know that they're going into a specific environment, we're bound to be there. We're pretty much in every conflict environment around the world, so we can give you some idea as to what you might be going to expect in those environments. But also we can give you some training about those principles of law that you should be aware of.
And the emergence of social media, the internet. They are not just reporters or journalists from organizations like Awani, for instance. We also have citizen journalists or freelance journalists entering conflict zones like Syria and all that. they are less protected. They do not have like what you call all the perks, insurance like we have here. So how do you communicate with them?
Well, certainly insurance is a huge issue for journalists and for citizen journalists, as you say. I mean, for citizen journalists, they're still protected as civilians. They still should not be the subject of targeting. Unfortunately, nowadays, if anybody picks up a mobile phone or looks like they're filming something, then they could very well be a target just because the person on the other side of the weapon doesn't necessarily know who they are or what they're doing. So in terms of protections, then I would say that people just need to be aware of how they're behaving in a conflict environment, to not single themselves out as being potential targets, as potential threats.
You were in Kabul.
Yes.
And this is, you only arrived in Malaysia since last year. You were posted in Malaysia since last year, but you were in Kabul for 3 years.
Oh, I was there for 1 year, yes.
For a year. So, what is your observation on the way or how journalists or reporters doing their work in Afghanistan?
Well, we had some good contacts with journalists in Afghanistan. There were lots who were going around, obviously, to various parts of the country to report on what was happening there. And many of them were very principled, very keen to ensure that they didn't cross those boundaries in terms of being very respectful of the people that they were interviewing and not necessarily taking sides in the story that they were wanting to promote. So we gave seminars as well in Kabul to journalists, to local journalists, because I think sometimes we forget about the local journalists who are there throughout the conflict. It's their own environment, and they're the ones who are going to be staying behind after the conflict has finished. So they need to understand the protections available to them.
So now, as of now, where is the most dangerous place for journalists?
That's a really good question. I mean, there are so many places in the world that are dangerous now. I think it depends every single year. I mean, 1 year, unfortunately, the Philippines was the most dangerous place because almost 50 journalists were killed in one attack. Another year, Libya was the most dangerous place because in a period of 1 week, we had 3 different attacks on journalists. This year, we've already seen attacks on journalists in Syria, in Yemen, and so on. So
they attack journalists because they are journalists or because they missed, I mean, they had different information about the person who they thought who were enemies, or why?
Yeah, I can't really comment on it myself, but my guess would be that the journalists were probably in the wrong place at the wrong time and just got caught up in the conflict.
All right, and you mentioned earlier about the international humanitarian law, and why is it important for journalists to understand this law? And it's just like it's some sort of the things that you had to prepare yourself before you enter the crisis zone. All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to answer that question. Kita jumpa lagi selepas ini. Kembali lagi dalam agenda Awani, masih bersama dengan Kelisiana Tin. Beliau merupakan penasihat perundangan serantau Jadualkuasa Antarabangsa Palang Merah atau ICRC, berbincang mengenai tema mengangkat maruah kemanusiaan dan kehidupan dan sempena anugerah penulis kemanusiaan yang dianjurkan oleh ICRC. Dan before we took a break, I asked you about the importance for journalists to understand and comprehend the international humanitarian law. And can you maybe elaborate a bit on the importance of IHL, the International Humanitarian Law, to journalists?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, it's really important for them to understand what their protections are under international humanitarian law. So journalists are specifically protected under one of the treaties of international humanitarian law, additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions, and they're treated as civilians. So they should not be targeted, they should not be killed, or they should not be shot at and they should be treated well if they happen to be detained. But also, I mean, no, please go ahead.
But you know, in this kind of war zone, I mean, in this kind of era where you have robots, you have drones, you have, you know, soldiers who are not human. They were not gonna. They were not gonna detect you whether you are a civilian or you are a journalist. So how are you going to protect yourself in this kind of new environment?
Yes, it's very difficult. I mean, we find it as humanitarian workers as well. It's very difficult sometimes to really guarantee that protection. I think that people just have to be very sensible where they are, ask the right questions, really find out what the environment is that they're in, and really respect the people who are there as well and respect the rules. But I mean, just going back to your question, as you were saying about drones and robots and so many other issues, I think why it's important for journalists to really understand international humanitarian law is so that they understand some of the implications behind those sort of weapons, those drones, robots. We hear about them all the time nowadays in the media, so it's important for journalists to be able to report accurately.
But one thing that I understand, if you comprehend the law, the international humanitarian law, and you simply can report on the abuse of this law during your stay in the conflict area. And one more thing about how freelance writers or writers who just want to enter a crisis zone. Do they have to, you know, what kind of preparation do they have to do? Can they contact you since you have you're active in more than 80 countries? Can they do that?
Yes, they can, if they'd like to know a little bit more about the situation. I mean, obviously, a lot of what we do is confidential, and it's really working on providing protection for the victims of the armed conflict. But we're very happy to talk to journalists about the general context and about the certain protections that they might want to put in place
and which
for
area
themselves.
are safe for them?
Yes, as far as we're able to tell as well, because I mean, increasingly humanitarian workers find themselves under attack as well.
And how about charities or NGOs, local NGO, for instance, Malaysian NGO, who want to go to, for instance, Syria? What kind of preparation they need to do? Is it similar to those that reporters need?
Yeah, it is quite similar. I mean, in terms of understanding the context and in terms of understanding the environment that they're going to go to, that it's a conflict environment, so they have to take particular protections. But I think importantly for NGOs, particularly those ones that are providing humanitarian services, they should be aware that they should be providing services on the basis of need, not on the basis of religion or race or a particular group of people. They should be able to reflect on what are the vulnerabilities in a particular environment and then provide assistance accordingly. So ICRC is working with a range of different NGOs in Malaysia and in other countries to try and encourage NGOs to develop codes of conduct for their own activities so that they're accountable for what they do, to make sure that they really can be impartial and that they can be independent and provide assistance to victims.
All right, we have about 1 minute left. And then coming back to the Young Humanitarian Writer Competition, can we expect, let's say, a compilation of articles or maybe a book submitted by the writers, journalists and freelance writers?
Well, certainly the journalists who put in the application, their article actually has to have already been published. So hopefully in the next few months we see a whole slew of articles about international humanitarian law. But for the people who are not journalists, who are just interested in this topic, then we will be publishing those articles, the winning articles at least, on our website.
And we have a bit more time. So if the viewers outside there want to know more about this, where can they get the information from?
They can contact us at the International Committee of the Red Cross here in Malaysia, and our contact details are on our website, www.icrc.org, and also through Malaysian Red Crescent or through the National Press Club.
All right, and this is in collaboration with the National Press Club Malaysia.
Yes.
And when can we know the submission is before November?
Yes,
right?
5th of November.
When can we know the result?
Hopefully the beginning of December. We have a good panel of eminent journalists in Malaysia judging, so they'll decide after that point.
And the judges are, you're going to keep that secret, isn't
Keep it secret at the moment.
All right, thank you very much, Khaliziana Tin. She's the Regional Legal Advisor, International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC. We talk about, kita bincang mengenai mengangkat maruah kemanusiaan dan kehidupan sempena anugerah penulis kemanusiaan ataupun Young Humanitarian Writer Competition yang dianjurkan oleh ICRC, dan sebarang cadangan anda boleh hantarkan ke social media kami, platform social media kami, Facebook dan Twitter dan sebagainya. Anda juga boleh menonton kami secara langsung di www.astroawani.com, juga peranti mudah alih melalui aplikasi Astro Awani. Saya Syafizan Joharia. Assalamualaikum. Salam hormat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.